And so let's bring in Ariel Helwani, the longtime Fox MMA reporter, old friend of mine. Ariel, you there, buddy?
I am here. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Great to have you on, buddy. This is a long way from Classic Now when you and I were working on the Emmy-nominated Classic Now.
It's unbelievable. Sitting right next to you, I was just a wide-eyed researcher, and I know you took a bit of a break from the show, and now here you are doing great things. So very, very happy for you. I'm a huge fan of the show, so this is an absolute honor for me. Thank you again.
Thanks, Ariel. Great to have you on. Now, we're more novices with MMA. You're obviously an expert. You've been entrenched with the sport from the start. What was your reaction to the comments by Rousey to Ellen yesterday about being suicidal after the loss?
Well, to be honest, it was a mix of emotions. At first, what struck me was, as you may have heard, when Ronda Rousey was 8 years old, her father committed suicide. And she's talked about this at length. Back in August, she fought a Brazilian named Bethe Correia, and Bethe kind of used that as part of the pre-fight buildup, and that really bothered Ronda for obvious reasons. So when I heard her talk about this, how she felt after the Holly Holm loss, like, wow, I mean, she really went into a dark place, and we know how much suicide means to her. She's been personally affected by it. So that at first was startling. It was shocking, to be honest. And then I thought to myself, all right, look, I mean, she was beat up pretty bad. She was knocked out. I mean, that was one of the more vicious knockouts that I had ever seen. It was clean. It was flush. And she's talking about her emotions following a knockout like that. We kind of have to chalk that up to the post-traumatic stress of getting knocked out. There's a lot going on in there, and a fighter of her caliber with so much at stake on such a big platform, the biggest star in the sport, she's going to go through a range of emotions. So it's understandable. And then to be honest, it was, a lot of fighters have talked like this before privately. Combat sports, MMA, it's different than basketball, baseball, football. The world, when you're on top, is all on your side, and then when you lose, you feel embarrassed. You feel like everyone's turned on you. You don't want to show your face anywhere. And it takes a lot to rebound from. A lot of fighters feel this way. A lot of fighters don't say this publicly. And it just reminded me why Ronda is beloved. She always wears her emotions on her sleeve. She's always very open, honest, and truthful. And this was just another example of that. So I give her a lot of credit for coming out and saying it.
To the casual MMA fan, to the guys like us who watch but not entrenched like you, we looked at Ronda Rousey before the Holly Holm fight as Mike Tyson pre-Buster Douglas. Did people in the sport who knew her game, see a loss coming?
Well, I would be lying if I said we all saw this coming. I do feel a little bit foolish that I didn't, I didn't come out and say it, because Holly Holm, a very decorated boxer. Holly Holm is no slouch. Holly Holm is arguably the greatest, boxer to come over to MMA and have a successful MMA run. I know James Toney was 1-0. 0-0 as an MMA fighter when he came into the UFC and lost, and we never saw him again, and he had a great career as well. But Holly has transitioned beautifully. She's still undefeated, and she beat the greatest female fighter of all time in Ronda Rousey. That being said, I don't think Ronda had as great of a career up until this point that Tyson did up until the Douglas fight. And also, in my opinion, you're only really as good as your opponents. And she wasn't fighting the caliber of fighters, in my opinion, that Tyson was fighting up until that point. But that being said, she was a cultural icon. She was a trailblazer. She is a trailblazer. She's a pioneer. She's all that and then some. And she was adding everything to her plate, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was growing, and there was so much pressure, and there was so much drama leading up to this particular fight. I mean, it was a perfect storm working against her, and I think part of that affected her in this fight.
Ariel Helwani of Fox Sports, the MMA reporter, joining us now. After the fight on the Dan Patch Show, we were talking after the loss to Holm. We thought, actually, this is probably a great thing for the sport of MMA, at least women's MMA. And we were talking at this party last night. Even people who don't really care about MMA, casual sports fans, are planning on opening up their wallets and buying or finding a way to watch the Holm-Rousey rematch. Is the rematch great for women's MMA, Rousey Holm, or great for the entire sport of MMA?
Yeah, it's all of the above. I think one of the most fascinating parts of combat sports, it doesn't matter if it's boxing, kickboxing, mixed martial arts, whatever, is seeing how a dominant champion responds from losing their belt. Years ago, George St. Pierre, who I consider to be one of, if not the greatest of all time, lost in shocking fashion. It's still the greatest upset, in my opinion, in MMA history, to Matt Serra. No one saw it coming, and GSP wasn't the cultural icon that Ronda is, but it was fascinating to see him respond, and how did he respond? He never lost again. So some fighters come back better than ever. Some of them view that O on their record as a major burden, and now that it's gone, they feel a lot freer. They can go out and train different ways. You know, a lot of fighters compare it to throwing a no-hitter when you have that O on your record. And as long as you have that O on your record, you're 10-0, 11-0, whatever, you don't want to change anything, even though in the back of your mind you know that some things need to be changed. The sport evolves, coaching evolves. You need to switch things up, but you don't want to mess with it. Now that it's gone, it allows her to do different things. And so you have that rematch. You want to see how she responds. Holly's a bigger star than ever. But let's not forget, Holly Holm is fighting on March 5th. She was supposed to fight Ronda next, but Ronda needs an extended period of time off. So they wanted her to fight in July, UFC 200, and now she's probably not coming back until at least November.
How catastrophic for the sport would it be if Holm got knocked out before she got a chance to fight Rousey?
So I kind of feel like this is a win-win for the UFC. Why? Because, all right, if Holly Holm wins on March 5th, then you got the rematch. It's obvious. It's as big as anything. You said it all. If Miesha Tate beats Holly Holm, if Miesha Tate beats Holly Holm, now you have a fascinating new storyline because Ronda Rousey has defeated Miesha Tate twice. And Ronda hates Miesha Tate. That's her biggest rival, even bigger than Holly. They have a personal grudge. And so now you have this new storyline. Miesha Tate is the champion walking around with her belt. And Ronda has that confidence that she's already dominated her twice, beaten her twice, and now she gets a chance to get back her belt against her biggest rival. So you can't really go wrong if you're the UFC. It is a risk in some ways because I think the world wants to see Holm, Rousey. They want to see her fight the person who beat her. But even if Miesha wins, if that happens, I really don't think the UFC loses out that much.
Ariel, so what's the buzz in the MMA journalistic community about Ellen DeGeneres getting this headline? Had Ronda opened up to nearly this extent after the fight, or was this the first time she got that deep?
This was actually her first television sit-down interview. She did an interview with Ramona Shelburne of ESPN, the magazine, following the fight. Ramona had been following her leading up to the fight, and then they came out with a big cover story afterwards where she opened up. But that was a written piece. Obviously, this is a lot different, and she didn't talk about the suicidal thoughts. She did SNL, which was an interesting play. That was her first public appearance, and she was, on that Sports Illustrated TNT show on Saturday night. But this was her first sit-down interview. Ellen has been a big supporter of hers. Ellen, on her Twitter page, actually tweeted out the first promo for this fight back in October. So that was a big deal. See, the thing about Ronda is, in our sport, we're kind of like the ugly duckling. We're like the little sister that gets ignored, that kid in school that gets ignored. And when we get that kind of attention as a sport, Ronda Rousey went on Good Morning America to announce this fight to the world. That is mind-blowing to us. That may not be a big deal to other people in other sports. That is just the fact that you guys, the Dan Patrick Show, are talking about MMA. That's a big news story in our world. And
Ariel,
I'm not just saying that because I'm on.
I remember when we worked together in 2006, you were into this sport already, and we had no idea where it was going. We knew a couple players, like a couple of the old-time veterans, Ken Shamrock and those guys. And you told us this is the sport. Boxing is lacking. Boxing is slipping. MMA is going to take over. And I think some people in traditional media just didn't see it coming.
Yeah, and coincidentally, Ken Shamrock is fighting Royce Gracie. That's a whole different story for a different day. This Friday on Spike TV, that is a wacky one. But, to your point, MMA has been ignored for a very long time. And as someone who went to journalism school, I went to Syracuse proudly, I sincerely believe it is the very best sport to cover. It's the best beat to be on. Why? Because you have characters like Ronda Rousey. Would you ever hear a Kevin Durant or a Carmelo Anthony or a LeBron James open up like that to the world, show emotion? It's all, I watch every post-game press conference, all that stuff. I can't get enough of it. I'm a huge Knicks fan. And you don't get this kind of realness from other athletes. MMA fighters are the best athletes to cover because they're not coddled. They don't have PR people telling them what to say, no stock answers. It's the most fascinating beat. And also, there's something like 45 UFC events this year alone. Every single week, almost, there's a big UFC event. And each and every week, it's a completely different story. It's not Game 56 of the regular season between the Bucks and the Sixers. Every single week there's one this Sunday on FS1. It means the world to every single one of those fighters. The stakes couldn't be higher. And then next week when we go to London, it's a whole different set of circumstances and stakes and titles on the line. That makes it fascinating. It's life or death. And that's why when you hear someone like Ronda say something like this, it's not as shocking as it may be to the regular world because that's the way these fighters feel. It really feels like life or death for them.
Ariel, great to have you back on. You're doing great work over there. We'll have you back on soon.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you.